Technologies that we're going to be using, the mean stack. So MongoDB is our database. Express.js, anybody make a note on what Express is? I know a lot of you said Express is the E in mean, but what is Express? What does it do?
It's a framework that's like, I mean, Node.js can have like, make you run a server or something, but there's like a very low level stuff. So Express makes it like much higher level, much easier to, like, for example, like a route, set up a route to display something. That's like so much easier.
Yep, so Express is what's known as a middleware. Okay, so it handles a lot of the sort of low-level network operations for us so we can focus on building the application. Angular, we talked about, and we'll cover that the last few weeks of lessons, so Angularjs. So Katie, what did you use, what was Angular used for in the application you were building when you were on co-op?
We just made, I don't know, we made like a single page app.
Yep.
I was working for my dad's company. He was actually developing the seed app with me at the time, so he was like creating it, and then we just had like the header and footer, and then the pages in the middle, I don't know, were interchangeable.
Okay. And anybody know why would we use AngularJS? Probably most of you have heard of Angular. Why would we use it? What are some of the reasons that it's become so popular?
It's faster.
Okay, it's faster in terms of doing what?
In terms of loading your pages, because you're not reloading all the information. You send all of the information at once, and then the user can just flick through the partials instead of reloading every page every time.
Right. So Angular basically just lets us, much in a similar way that Ajax lets us reload part of a page, Angular lets us update variables from the server while all of our HTML and CSS stays static. So if we want to update pages, we can simply update server-side values. We pass those values, and Angular can change those values on the page without us having to reload. So it's used for two-way data binding between the client and server without causing page refresh and without using Ajax.
So like MLS, kind of how MLS does it. Like the real estate website, they update from their database. So if you're going to look for a property, it doesn't refresh the whole page.
Here, let's try it. Okay, so let's say. Okay, you here. I'll demo. You give me instructions, and I'll do it exactly as you want me to. Okay, so you tell me what kind of search to run or what to click, and we can look at it. Okay.
Okay, so if you click, well, this is not necessarily updating, right? Well, that is. It's thinking they're old platforms, so it's kind of
The older one? Okay. Well, here's a sample that uses the mean stack. Looks like they've disabled this project. It's too bad. This was a nice little tutorial and you could get all the code. Oh. So for example, here we're using Angular. If I want to replace the photo, at least said I could do that. It doesn't seem to be working at the moment. Onto the box. Let's try that one more time. Maybe my picture's too big. Let's try it. Doesn't seem to be working.
I think it's Firefox that's doing it.
Maybe it is Firefox.
That issue with Firefox.
So Angular basically, it allows for a much richer user experience and interactivity, but it also allows for that really fast two-way data binding. Okay. I see a lot of people wrote about, let's talk about MongoDB for a bit. So several people said it's schemaless or a no SQL database. What does that mean? Anybody know what it means from what you read? How can we have a database with no SQL?
It means like all your information is written pretty much in JSON file, like in JSON format. So like you don't have like a table, right?
Okay, so what would be the benefit? Why would we want to store information in JSON format in a database?
I don't have to convert the data.
Well, that's one. Yep.
It's faster access.
Yeah, it's really fast, right? JSON's just a JavaScript array. So why does it make sense if we're going to build do our server side with Node and Express? What's the benefit of having the data stored as JSON? I mean, you guys both sort of alluded to it already. Right? It's really easy because our data is in the same format as our programming language. So we don't have to do any kind of conversion in terms of how we store the data. We don't need to use SQL commands anymore to do create, read, update, and delete. We can just use plain old vanilla JavaScript to do all those things. And all of our data, if we want to render it in the browser or interpret it or send it as an API, it's already in JSON format. And JSON's really lightweight and it's really fast. So we do still have tables. They're not called tables in a NoSQL database. They're called collections instead. They're like tables, but we typically also don't bother having relationships between tables, which is simple. You know, if we want to have a student and grades, we just dump it all as a JSON array into one collection, and it's all there. So we don't have to do things like joins or complicated queries anymore. So those typically aren't used. You know, I wouldn't build Amazon.com and run it on a NoSQL database or Blackboard. The database is too complicated. But something like a single page web application where we're dealing with a small, simple data store, using a NoSQL database makes a lot of sense. MongoDB isn't the only NoSQL database. There are other ones, but it's probably the most popular and it's the one that's used the most commonly with Node applications. So we haven't really talked about Node, which is kind of the main technology. A few people made notes on where it came from. Where did Node come from? Why are we learning it? What are the advantages of using Node? Why don't we just carry on with C# or PHP? Why bother?
Because it's faster, because it's use of the 8 engine, which is developed by Google itself. So it's much faster and efficient.
Node applications tend to be, sorry?
Well, Node has like async capability, so like asynchronous, like it runs the commands asynchronously. So it's kind of better for like some single-threaded CPU to run it.
Okay, that's absolutely true. Now, could you explain that to somebody who wasn't a programmer when you say Node is asynchronous? We'll talk about that in everyday language. What does that mean and why is asynchronous? What's the benefit of asynchronous programming? Something we haven't done before.
So it's kind of like when you on the browser, when you do something that's that you see kind of like happening at the same time. Multitasking is actually like it do one thing, the first thing really, and then the next thing really fast. So it looks like they're happening at the same time, but they actually asynchronous just means like happen one after another. So just like
That's a pretty good explanation. We'll talk more about synchronous and asynchronous code. We'll watch a little video from Code School in a bit where I think he does a really clear example. But basically most web programming languages and all the ones we've used before, they're synchronous, which means our code executes, things happen in a certain order. So if we start to do something like let's say we want to connect to a database or read from a file, nothing else will happen until that process is done. Then the next piece of code executes the next piece. And it happens, it starts and stops, starts and stops. The beauty of Node is Node allows us to program asynchronously, meaning we can start something here and we can let that process run, and while that process is still running, our code can continue executing. So if our page has to do a whole lot of stuff, we no longer have to do it one step at a time. In effect, we can do, Node allows multiple things to be happening, and as soon as this process is finished, our code can jump back up here and do what's next. And there's no more waiting. So it's built, as you said, on Google, this V8, on Google's JavaScript engine. So the developers of Node, originally, they were guys that worked, Ryan Dahl was the main developer, he worked at Google. So he came up with this idea. And originally, he didn't even really develop it necessarily with web applications in mind. Node is actually for any kind of really low-level network communication. So you have some kind of office network, and you have some process that's running. You know, you want to check for a file and let's say copy it over here, read that file whenever a new file comes in or it gets updated. You could actually use Node. We don't need the browser HTTP at all. Node can run those kinds of communications. And we're also going to talk about, this is a key, and it really has to do with asynchronous programming, which is that it's event driven. So the way Node works is a server starts, and we basically create our own web server, and that server starts running and is always listening for HTTP requests. Did a request come in? Did a request come in? And what do we do with those requests? And what else can we be doing while we're processing these requests, rather than doing them all in a start-stop way? We can handle multiple things, and Node can juggle multiple applications and multiple requests at once. So the result is our users get stuff really fast at the end of the day. We'll also talk about this, MVC. Anybody really know what MVC is, or how would you describe it in a really simple way? If you're going to describe MVC to a non-programmer, what is it?
You have something working with all of your data requests, and you have something else serving up all of your visual elements.
Yep. So which two elements are those? What element handles all the data requests?
Just look at basics.
Well, they're called model, view, and controller. And then what's?
Oh, yeah, no. Model is the would be what you're serving up. No, that's wrong. Never mind. I'm just speaking off of my head.
All right, that's okay.
I think it's about separating the view and the logic.
That's exactly what it's about. So model, view, controller it's really an architecture pattern or a style. It's not particular to any one technology. We can use model view controller with ASP.NET. We can use model view controller with Node. We can use it with all kinds of other. There's even PHP frameworks that allow us to build applications in PHP using model view controller architecture. So here's really what it looks like from a visual point of view. So our model, these are files that, as Brandon said, they handle all of the work with our databases. Okay, so they define what are the objects in our database and what do they look like. You know, a student object, a customer object, a grade object. The views, this is our user interface. So these are our templates, mostly HTML, CSS. Maybe they have certain server values. Maybe they use Angular for representing server values. And then in the middle, we have these files that are controllers. These are really the brains. So we've got our data, we have our user interface, and then we have the logic that goes back and forth in between. Okay? Now, when we built applications in PHP, they did all these things. It's just that we didn't break these out into separate files, right? One PHP file, it did all those things. It contained, let's say we were building a PHP file like, so I built this one last summer in